Thing number four, hopefully I won't say that for the rest of the show, but no guarantees. Thing number four, Gary, we're moving to France. French elections follow the UK model.
So this has been a fantastic benefit. New DKI intern Alex comes to us from the University of Exeter. He's doing a phenomenal job really early on. But because we have him here, we're getting all kinds of fascinating European political analysis, which I think is terrific. Last week, we talked about the UK election, where the Tories, the Conservative Party, were voted out of power for the first time in 14 years. Now, in fairness, the voters were fed up with Tory mismanagement and a general inability to get anything done, including the things they did have control over. They were fairly inept in the way they conducted themselves. But a big part of the story and a big part of Alex's analysis is that the Tories didn't really lose as much as you would think they did. What happened was Nigel Farage's party ended up splitting the vote. And so they didn't get the Labour Party in Great Britain won an enormous number of seats and the right to select the new prime minister. But they didn't win a much larger share of the vote. It's just the parties on the right split that vote. We saw the same kind of thing happen in France. It was a similar situation. Macron's government was in trouble, not in a good place, and was being challenged by Marie Le Pen's party, which was looked like they were going to win a ton of seats coming from the right. And France has a number of left-wing parties, and what they did was extremely strategic. They basically banded together and pulled all of their candidates except one in each one of the runoff elections. So they basically had a first round of elections, as they do in France, where Le Pen's right-wing party did extremely well. And then in all the runoff elections, there may have been 3 or 4 left-wing parties, and they just looked and said who performed the best. And, so they had, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the parties behind the second, third, and fourth best performing candidates, they pulled their candidates and said, you know what, we don't need to win. Our side needs to win. And they were able basically to rig a landslide. And I don't mean rig in a dishonest way. I mean, what they did was extremely strategic, where parties were pulling their own relatively successful candidates to make sure that Le Pen's party was not successful overall. They managed to do it, and the right-wing party underperformed expectations and left Macron still in power. And with the left in charge in France, expect higher taxes, higher spending there, and probably some of their citizens departing for other places, either in the EU or maybe better tax havens. Mark, what do you think? Have you been following French politics?
I have, unfortunately, because who loves politics more than me when it comes to just following the U.S. politics. But when you look abroad, it's funny because even Macron is sitting there and based on the policies that have been put out there, even he's saying is like, hey guys, this doesn't work. This is going to breach EU protocols. When you look at some of the levels that you're talking about spending, there's still this renewed push in terms of the environmental side. When you look at this additional spending into green, and you have to turn around and say, you have the greenest, most prolific nuclear system in the world. Why are you not going to optimize that? Why are you continuing to throw money after things that we know work, but with significant limitations, especially when you look at the intermittency of it? So when you look at their plan, it's going to fall flat. It's going to just make the situation worse. And it's funny, to your point on the bond market earlier being the smart money, when Le Pen was leading, the bond market all of a sudden said, this isn't good. And they were like, all right, well, so you want Macron's side, but yet they spend frivolously as they continue to. But that means that they're going to be in a worse situation and actually fall out of the protocols that have been set up from the EU. The last point is always going to be what is happening on the immigration side. You're continuing to see these horrific things coming out in terms of these different stabbing attacks, these different increase in criminal activity, and there are areas that are now quote unquote no-go areas when they're only continuing to go, where essentially the cops are saying, look, we only have so many resources. We need to focus on what we control, and some of these are out of our control. That only carries for so long until people get disgusted and start to take, things into their own hands, and that creates less control, more anxiety. And I think that that's only going to continue to show up in the economy, which is then going to require more subsidies, more stimulus, and you continue to see this spiral to the downside.
Yeah, there years ago, there were stories about some of the fire departments in Paris. Even if a building was on fire, they would not enter certain neighborhoods unless they had a police escort. And that's a situation where, if for anyone who's been to Paris before, there are no spaces between the buildings, right? It's like New York, where you have entire blocks of buildings that are connected. And so if one building on that block catches fire, the entire block is at risk of going up in flames. It's a lot of people there. And those buildings tend to be like 5- and 6-floor walk-ups, I believe. So, evacuating an entire block is not easy. That's the kind of situation where a delay is significant. And if the fire department doesn't feel like they can get there safely, that creates a huge problem.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, I think the biggest thing is going to come down to the spending, because that is going to be front and a lot of those political things on the streets. That's something that is a slower burn and then starts to really pick up. But when you look at the spending, I think that's when you're going to start to see some real panic, and I think the bond market is starting to sniff that out. And when you look at just where that direction, I think that is going to be one of the biggest issues, because everyone likes to point to Germany. Obviously, France is the second largest economy in the EU. And if they start to go down that route, it's only going to be a slippery slope, because everyone's going to say, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And we saw what happened in 2011. We saw what happened with the European financial crisis. And let's be fair, they've never really recovered when you look at consumer spending, when you look at investment. And then the last piece is, what is your energy security? If I am a heavy consumer, whether it's an industrial, whether it's a chemical, whether it's fertilizer, I'm going to consume a lot of power. Now, what is my power price going to be? What is my natural gas price going to be? If I don't have a semblance of an idea of what that's going to look like over the next decade, I'm not investing there. I'm going to invest in Texas. I'm going to go somewhere else that's going to have a much, not even a better return, just a more stable organization where I can say, okay, I know I can get my natural gas here. I know I can get my electricity here. These are the wholesale rates. Let's invest here instead of building something new in France and Germany, where those unknowns are only going to increase based on how this election played out.
And by the way, you're right. France gets about 75% of their energy from nuclear power, which is the most stable, inexpensive, long-lasting way that you could possibly set up a grid. But, so that should make France a great destination for industry and businesses. But now the new parties that have won are talking about tax rates of 90%. And how do you do that? Who is that owns a business that cares about power prices or infrastructure, says, yeah, I'm going to move there. I'm going to put my business there and get taxed 90%. They're killing their own growth.
Anything else, Mark, that you would add to that before we move on to point 5?
I think it's a great point, and it's something that has to be talked about, because everyone thinks like, oh, I'm going to tax the rich. It's like, well, if they're already rich, then that money is elsewhere. Like when you're doing a tax rate like that, you're taxing people that are trying to get to that level, that want to work, that want to go out and earn that. And you're taxing away their ability to do it. So to Gary's point, it's like, well, why am I going to stay here? I want opportunity. I want the ability to move up this socioeconomic ladder. And you're going to slap me down if I start to be successful. It's like, so you're talking about renewables and moving away from nuke. Now you're also going to come directly after me with that is trying to move my family along, move my company along. Nope, I'm going elsewhere. And that's how you see that brain drain. That's how you see the industrial base moving. And that's when you start to see those jobs running elsewhere.
Interesting stuff coming out of France. Alex, if you're listening as well, thanks for that insight. And we'll be sure to stay on top of developments there.